The 2025 International Colloquium Series Europe is sponsored by Union Theological Seminary in the City of New York, the Episcopal Diocese of California, King's College London, Regent's Park College, University of Oxford, the Center for Black Theology at Regent's Park College, Oxford, the Protestant Theological Institute of Paris, and in partnership with the Cathedral Church of the Holy Trinity, the American Cathedral in Paris.
The Northern California Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Community Foundation is dedicated to promoting justice, health, education, and service. Please consider making a donation at NorcalMLKFoundation.org. Every donation makes a difference.
Raymond Carr's paper entitled, I will just say the title of the paper, Hearing the Light, the Gospel According to Thelonious Monk. Video? Yep. And thank you so much, Ray, for being with us.
So I want to begin like others and thank you all for this wonderful occasion. I want to thank my friend Mark. We've been going back and forth with emails and everything, and it's just been wonderful to get to know you and to feel your spirit in all of this. So I want to thank Mark. I want to thank my sister Anne-Marie for helping to set this up, Frederic, and then my sister who's here, Sister Estelle, who's over there, that I didn't know we had made acquaintance with each other over a year ago. So it's nice to see you again in this space. So what a great joy it is for me to be in the City of Light. That's what this is. I've been reading about the City of Light and to speak about hearing the light in the City of Light. Isn't that something? That's kind of special. As we drove to the hotel yesterday, I could see culture all around. And I thought, what's at the center of that? All that culture. Various styles of life that immediately said, you are no longer in London, and certainly not in Oxford. That's what I thought. And as it continued, I peered at the cityscape, admiring the diverse forms of architecture and the richness of human difference. Even the radio station was genreless. Maybe that's one way to talk about the human. Rather than giving it a genre, it has no genre whatsoever. Genreless. I heard Louis Armstrong on the radio, Diana Ross, hip-hop, and before I got out of the car, a classical tune, all on the same radio station. And then I thought about the African-American relationship to Paris, Josephine Baker dancing, James Baldwin reflecting and writing, Nina Simone singing, all having escaped from what they perceived as American racism or something else that would not tolerate difference. I imagine that part of the reason the City of Light became a sanctuary for so many artists is tied to the fact that the complexities, the angularities, and the ambiguities are already wrapped up in your culture. Now, I know Paris is not perfect. No city is perfect. In fact, the last car driver that brought us here, he told me it wasn't perfect. But there is something at the heart of the City of Light that made Black Americans come here to see the light. And I hope today you can hear the light as we together think about what Thelonious Monk's music can mean for our differences and what Monk can mean for our disillusionments and our hopefulness. I take great pride to know that W.B. Du Bois, one of our greatest intellectuals, Josephine Baker, Buford Delaney, who was a painter, Richard Wright, a novelist, and a litany of other writers, dancers, singers, and artists moved to Paris during troubling times. Many of them were not just attempting to see the lights of Paris. They were seeking to hear the light in terms of their own freedom for humanity. So I want to begin with two quotes as together we address the subject of hearing the light, the gospel according to Thelonious Monk. Two quotes. And the first quote is from a Canadian by the name of Leonard Cohen. And quote reads like this: ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offerings. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. The second quote is from Thelonious Monk. It reads like this: you know, anybody can play a composition and use for our chords and make it sound wrong. It's making it sound right that's not easy. All right? In the second quote, we find Monk, the composer, offering a key insight into how he created songs, meaning a song must have integrity. That is, a song has to sound right, and that's not easy. To demonstrate Monk's perception as a composer, I will outline 3 major points as a way to come to terms with the gospel according to Thelonious Monk. First, Monk developed the soundscape of his music with respect to a kind of dialogical tension. In this tension, he privileged the sound or the coherence of a tune. He privileged the way things held together, so much so that this way of privileging opened the door to his embracing tensions, ambiguities, nuances, and fragments. This allowed Monk to play freely between the tones and microtones. He was in fact known for playing his music between the cracks, between the white and black keys. The subsequent 2 points in this paper flow from this first point. That is, Monk played inside of tradition and Monk played outside of tradition. So in composing, arranging, conducting, and performing, which are all part of one single musical architecture, Monk's melodic imagination becomes an analogy for those of us who would think in a radical theological direction, particularly in relation to Karl Barth, the grand Swiss theologian, and his dogmatic interpretations of Mozart, and James Cone, the father of black theology, and his existential participation in the spirituals and the blues. And by the way, here's Barth's book on Mozart. Here's Cone's book on the spirituals and the blues. There are my books over there on Monk. Okay, so I want you to see the connection and follow that line of thought. And that's what I'm doing. I'm setting up a certain taxonomy in relationship to these two thinkers. Playing in the dialogical, harmonious thinking, I call it. Thelonious Monk, often called the high priest of bebop, which is a genre of jazz that had its heyday in the mid-1940s. It was a revolutionary moment tied to a peculiar cultural and historical impulse or impulses. Cornel West identified bebop as a quote, as a revolt against the middle-class jazz of the museum against swing and white musicians, close quote, whose styles have become culturally hegemonic. Bebop in this respect signalizes a period where a kind of coming of age for black jazz artists and black people in general resounded with a cultural shift in mood. It was part of the zeitgeist, and Monk's predilection for playing bebop jazz revolved around playing and dancing within the contrast or tensions and juxtapositions. It is no secret that Monk was interested in how things struggle with their opposites. And this playing within dialogical tensions is not limited to the way Monk played his music. By the way, Monk played with flat fingers, hitting the keys like a mallet or drum, rather than playing with his fingers like a cat. You're supposed to play like a cat. Okay? In other words, he played the piano more like a percussion instrument, which it is. But his playing intention resides primarily, the playing intention that I'm concerned with resides primarily in his mode of thinking about music. An approach I've adopted and described as a form of hermeneutical musicality or harmonious thinking. And you hear this thinking, first of all, in the aphorisms characterized by the witty 3-word phrases like 2 is 1, or discrimination is important. Now, regarding the latter phrase, Monk suggested that what you leave out of a tune is just as important as what you put into it. So the key to a good melody is not simply what you add. It might be in what you subtract. Other phrases Monk include play the melody or hear the light, 2 of my favorites. Monk's approach to tensions, contrasts, and these contingencies can also be heard in how he listened for music. I didn't say listen to. How he listened for music, which shapes to some extent what it means to do theology in the mode of Monk. Joseph Komunica, the poet, describes Monk's way of listening and its relationship to his melodic imagination. Listen to this quote. Monk's music requires an active listener, someone who doesn't have to be told the whole story. For there is an emotional elasticity in Monk's world. Things that seem at odds with each other often fit side by side. The human mind does the framing inside and outside of conventional references. In this respect, I agree with those who argue that Monk's conception of music is tied to hearing between the lines of his own accord, and his nonconformist ego told him what he heard was perfectly valid. This courage to play his music his way represents one of the things I admire most about Monk, Miles Davis, Dizzy Gillespie, Mary Lou Williams, and many other jazz luminaries. They played their music their way. They were free, and not in the words of Toni Morrison, preoccupied with the white gaze. I think we're too preoccupied with the white gaze. This reminds me of an interview by Cornel West who describes another bebopper named Charlie Parker. His name is Charlie, they call him Bird, Charlie Bird Parker. The title of the interview is illuminating. The title is, Charlie Parker Didn't Give a Damn. That says all you need to know. Parker was being active. The point that West makes is that Parker was being active and not just reactive to racism and the other ways people judge his music. Thus, this kind of radical subjectivity or individuation situates Monk on the subjective side of Karl Barth's objective interpretation of Mozart's music and on the objective side of James Cone's subjective participation in the spirituals and the blues. In other words, it places him on the inside, meaning in between the cracks, those places where the light gets in. Dancing around the objective and the subjective. Listen to Karl Barth's description of an objective view of Mozart. I want you to hear it. He reads like this. He said, Mozart's music is not a personal confession. He does not reveal in his music any doctrine, and certainly not himself. Mozart does not wish to say anything. He just sings and sounds. Thus, he does not force anything on the listener, does not demand that the listener make any decisions or take any positions. He simply leaves the listener free. I'll skip that next paragraph. You can read it on your own. I'm going to jump down after this. But catch this. This is Barth's interpretation of Mozart, a fact that reflects Barth's theology. Don't forget that. By contrast, James Howell Cone, the father of black theology, stands on the other side of that. He emphasizes existential and subjective insights. When describing, for example, the spirituals and the blues, the book I just showed you, a book representing his most important turn in black theology, Cone writes the following. I want you to hear it. He said, existentially, the subject matter and focus of this book have been defined by the black musical forms which have influenced my life. I've written about the spirituals and the blues because I've lived the experience which created them. I affirm the reality of the spirituals and the blues as authentic expressions of my humanity, responding to them in rhythms of dance. I therefore write about the spirituals and the blues because I am the blues, and my life is a spiritual. Without them, I cannot be. By the way, Cone is the one that was awarded an honorary doctorate by this institution. Don't want to miss that. Let me continue. In this, we hear this juxtaposition without it being a strict contradiction. That is, between Barth's dogmatic interpretation on one hand and Cone's existential participation on the other. They both, nevertheless, are speaking in terms of emphasis or accent. So do not dogmatize them into a binary, making it about the subjective and the objective. That's what we do. You get to focus on that part, okay? It is a reminder of simply their interests. Monk, however, approaches this from another perspective. He troubles their categories. How? Because he plays in the surplus in between and provokes a kind of mindfulness, a playing or framing in a way where things that, quote, that seem at odds with each other fit side by side. In his melodic logic, Monk inspires a mode of thinking in and around Barth's objective and Cone's subjective orientation. This is why, in another context, I argue that Barth turns Schleiermacher upside down, Cone turns Barth inside out, out and I go round and round in a hermeneutical circle. By the way, if you didn't catch the reference, upside down, boy, you turned me. Yeah. And by the way, I heard that on the radio yesterday. That was one of the songs I heard on the radio. That was the Diana Ross song that played yesterday. But anyway, what Monk is doing when he's playing in this way is what I hope we do as theologians. He's pensively attending to their differences. Pensively. Monk inspires, as one writer notes, a disharmonious harmony in his music. And this in turn inspires my theological music. This explains why I appreciate Monk's aphorisms and his challenging us to hear the light. For we must immediately come to terms with the fact that you're working with a mixed metaphor. And we do not hear light, we see light. But in the Western mode of thinking, however, we demand that our ideas be clearer, more rigorous, more precise, because we crave a kind of exactitude. Maybe we're just craving control. We moderns have nursed a heritage where we think, know, and see, rather than hear, believe, and dance. I'm trying to dance. In the African American aesthetic mode of religious apprehension, however, I've become fascinated with an oral aesthetics, AURL, and a religious taxonomy that frees or liberates our thinking from categories that tend to overdetermine and circumvent the critical, creative, and constructive power of black religious orientations. This kind of religious freedom corresponds with the view of Charles H. Long, the historian of religion, who argued provocatively, he would always say this to me, and it's written a little differently in his book. He said this way. He said that a theology of freedom is first a critique of theology as a powerful mode of discourse. I want you to catch that. If you're going to critique if you want a free theology, or theology of freedom, you first got to critique theology and its power valences. Let me continue. This is the first step toward a freedom that liberates us not merely in our Exodus experiences, but also during our exiles. In case you haven't figured it out yet, Americans are enduring an exilic experience right now. Black Americans have been experiencing that for a much longer time. This is the reason many African Americans came to the City of Light. Thus, in turning to Monk's oral aesthetics, we find a witness to a form of rhythmic tension and repose, musicality and technique, tradition and innovation, structure and spontaneity, point and counterpoint, sounds and silences that all play a role, not merely in Monk's musical improvising, but also, hopefully, in our theologizing. But can we hear the light? Even here in the City of Light. With the exercise of a little bit of phenomenological imagination, if Monk's music can function as a medium, his hermeneutical musicality can be a gift to our theological imagination, both inside and outside the traditions we inhabit. I turn now to Monk's playing on the inside of tradition. Stay with me. When thinking of Monk on the inside, we learn that he does not only require active listeners. Monk makes a second demand on his hearers. He surprisingly compels listeners to familiarize themselves with traditions. Notice the S on that. For he played the past with his left hand and innovated with his right. But the truth is that his appreciation for tradition is implied in his whole compositional approach. Thelonious, by the way, is third in the line of three great composers that include Jelly Roll Morton and Duke Ellington, who, I have to say, who has an aside, this is an aside. Duke Ellington once met Queen Elizabeth in Leeds, and who was so fascinated with the meeting, and I don't know if it was Ellington that was fascinated or if it was the Queen that was fascinated. So he composed a record called The Queen's Suite in her honor. This record was not pressed for sale until after Ellington's death. The point is that the record was for her listening pleasure only. A point that reiterates the fact that Duke Ellington was a true Duke. Noble, elegant, and classy. That's Duke. Right? But I digress. Monk, nevertheless, as a composer, follows in this musical tradition. Martin Williams, the jazz critic, insightfully portrays jazz history as reflecting a kind of gradual evolution in rhythm, swinging like a pendulum from innovation to form to innovation to form. In Monk's innovative approach to jazz, however, innovation is found in form. And Monk carries, extends, and signifies. And that's a very important word in the African American tradition. Signifying. You guys look that word up later, all right? He signifies on previous forms, and then through tradition itself, creatively addresses thematic developments associated with black cultural forms. Monk on some occasion would split up a theme, alter the chords, and commit to only the quote, the best aspects of the original, rid it of its prettiness and its sentimentality, and leave it with its implicit beauty, close quote, as he sees it. So on the one hand, he's composing in a tradition, and on the other hand, he is innovating and recomposing in relationship to it, dancing a little to the side of tradition without totally being outside of tradition. Gotta watch Monk when he dances. He's actually conducting, by the way. This is a dialogical tension on the inside. Here I agree with Stanley Crouch, the poet and cultural critic, who argued that Monk's music was so far inside the tradition that he seemed to demand that the listener have a thorough enough knowledge of the African American legacy to appreciate how he was playing around with it, off it, and through it, signifying. Maybe the issue is, let me just say this is not in the paper, right? Maybe the issue today is we just don't have a thorough enough knowledge of the African American tradition. Let me continue. Theologically, Karl Barth interpreted other theologians in a similar mode of discovery, using a method he described as interpretatio in bonum partem. You have to excuse my Latin. I learned it on my own, okay? And that means millennium or optimum partem, meaning interpretation in a good, better, or best way. Extracting the best and therefore the most useful parts. In this way of reading his predecessors and his contemporaries, however, Barth made fiduciary commitments to the past, gaining insights even from their oversights. Perhaps Alexander Mcaway is correct when he writes that Barth's, when he describes Barth's approach as a teacher, what I hear in distinct Monkian overtones. I want you to hear this. He says this. When Barth interpreted a theologian in terms of the best parts of her or his work, he was affirming the fact that no system of thought is so enclosed by error that it cannot also speak, perhaps even in spite of itself, a meaningful word to the church. And I believe it was also asserting that not only his view of Scripture, not only his understanding of the incarnation can yield useful reflections of the faith, but that the whole tradition with its various systems and all their parts is capable of such articulation if one would but look for it. And I say if one would but listen for it. We need to listen to other traditions despite what we think about them. Let me continue. James Cone takes a similar approach, stating once in the classroom that with all brilliant insight, there is some blindness, close quote. For Cone was always, as he notes, quote, searching for ingredients to put in my own view of the gospel and the black liberation struggle, close quote. He continued, he said, quote, Barth, Tillich, Bultmann, Bonhoeffer, and other Europeans were merely the tools I appropriated in order to say what I believe was the truth of the gospel as defined by the black experience, close quote. In this I hear Barth and Cone, like Monk, deliberating over each moment, pensively agonizing for the right theological sound. What's the point? The point is, this lecture is not designed to explicate Karl Barth in order to clarify what Barth is doing. It is designed to implicate Barth in relationship to Cone in order to clarify what I am doing. This is Monk mode. It is not an apologetic move. It is a proleptic term designed to articulate a tradition on the inside, moving it forward, bringing it up to date, recomposing, signifying. When we bring a Janus-faced Monk to the conversation between Barth and Cone, by the way, Janus-faced means you're looking in two directions at the same time. Monk is always described as being Janus-faced. When you bring that to Barth and Cone, that is one who plays ambidextrously, looking in two directions, past and future, toward Barth and Cone. We're not creating a movement, but participating in a movement within a movement. This is not in the paper, but Monk is often described as being a revolution within inside a revolution. The bebop revolution, he's a revolution within the revolution. And here's the way I say this. And I know you all that are reading and know French might not follow me, but please try. I said, when you have a revolution within a revolution, you gesture towards something beyond revolution, which is a revolution that revolutionizes our revolution, God's revolution. Let me move on. So then unity and community are found precisely in the affirmation of differences, in the willingness to dance in the tensions and juxtapositions of our traditions in an age of uncertainty. Monk's way of attending to traditions and embracing transition is heard in his transmuting, his improvising on them, while making the best of them. And this type of courage has had a fundamental and functional effect on my theologizing. But Monk doesn't just play inside the tradition. He also plays outside the tradition. And this is my last point. I'll try to get through this quickly and close it down, okay? This brings me perhaps to the most demanding and liberating aspect of Monk's musical aesthetic. To understand how Monk could work so pensively on the inside of tradition, which allowed him to innovate so freely, spontaneously, and joyfully outside of tradition, we must come to terms with how Monk, quote, revives the traditional idea of basing his variations and improvisations directly on the melody, close quote. The melody is a keynote to his whole approach to jazz. And it was what affirmed in his advice to his artists. He would always say to artists, play the melody, he'd say. You can make a better solo if you know the tune. Everything, the remaining elements and the sequencing of the song, including the rhythms and the harmonies, and even the spaces and silences, were determined by their relationship to the melody, or what many have described as the cantus firmus, the fixed melody in Monk. This approach to melody is how Monk gains access to the excess and deals with the surplus. By the way, it was Dietrich Bonhoeffer who often emphasized the idea of a cantus firmus. On this point of melody, some critics write about Monk the way Barth writes about Mozart. Listen to Williams again. He said, quote, Monk places technique at the disposal of music, but he does not dazzle us. Indeed, he does not show us anything. He can take the simplest note and make it count in every way because he knows the musical worth of each sound he makes and each silence he allows. In the passion of the moment, he may even strike a note in mistake, but we all know none of this distracts. Indeed, Monk himself would often say, sometimes say, quote, you have to mean the note. Isn't that interesting? You have to mean the note. The note becomes what you make it mean. Why? Why is this the case? Because Monk functions as a medium, like Mozart. And because the note is what it is, because of the melody. Barth captures this point when using music to discuss theology. He says this, quote, we grasp a whole in each position, even as each note of a melody contains the entire melody, close quote. And then listen to his description of Mozart, who, quote, creates music from a mysterious center and so knows and observes limits to the right and the left, above and below, while he maintains moderation. Likewise, Monk, moving on the whole notes of the white keys, shares his bent notes, his harmonic clusters and silences, spaces, and rests. All surrounding the cantus firmus with respect to a kind of free objectivity, even as he improvises on the melody. Watch this. On the other hand, however, Monk expresses fully his own subjectivity, manipulating the black keys, sharps and flats. He can highlight the melody by subtracting and distilling it as effectively as others add to it. Indeed, the wrong notes are his choices. The silences are his. The melodic fragments, the harmonic clusters, and rhythmic displacements are all included in Monk's melodic imagination. He embraces the harmonic and rhythmic tensions. He ventures off the beat, then on it, then back off it. He zigzags, loops around, bends a note here, leaves a note over there, suggesting while all the time anticipating his melodic goal well in advance, sometimes leaving tensions until the last possible minute or leaving them unresolved altogether. Listen to the song Mysterioso. For Monk, the means and the ends cohere. They hold together. That's a quote from King, by the way, Martin Luther King. What counted above else for Monk, at least in its performance, is the rhythm, but in relation to the melody, because it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. In this kind of of liberated subjectivity. We find Monk here closer to James Cone, but still in between the cracks, contributing to the meaning of the divine melody in all of its subtle shades, like the hearing of a soundscape in nature, or viewing the lush lawns and tree-lined paths of Luxembourg gardens, the Eiffel Tower, or a lovely constellation. Monk was attuned to all the sounds and colors and spaces. Perhaps this is why the jazz tradition never became a form of traditionalism for Monk, and why theological tradition should never become traditionalism for the theologian. For the beauty of our past traditions, including the lively ancestral voices which are still alive to God, that's Romans 14, by the way, should put us in mind of the brilliant insight of Miroslav Pelikan, who in his classic work once said that tradition is the living faith of the dead. Traditionalism is the dead faith of the living. The more I tune to Monk musically, the more possibilities expand theologically, expanding and becoming more multidimensional, and resisting one-dimensionality. For theologians who think through what it means to hear the melody of the divine in the midst of the world, this analogy finds center in the mystery of Jesus Christ, who in the Assumptio Carnis expresses a radical openness toward the polyphony of voices within the world and encourages us to improvise in relationship to the divine melody. I hope all of you in your future will dance to the music of God. In essence, the incarnation takes on aesthetic form in Monk's music, and Monk's music takes on a theological form through the incarnation, even while remaining what it is, just jazz. Spiritual and even political possibilities can be developed more robustly, arguably most appropriately in that sequence, at least for Bach. A more comprehensive view of the divine, however, can unfold in possibilities that accompany the complex nature of human life if we approach from the other side through what I call a free pneumatic counterpoint. If the cantus firmus is clear and plain, the counterpoint can be developed to its limits. That's Bonhoeffer. So extra church realities in the Word of God, heard extramuros ecclesia, meaning outside the walls of the church, are set in relief more clearly. I'm coming to an end here. In folklore, spiritual, hip-hop, and other modes of being or styles of life which become consequential for the analogical imagination. And this kind of attunement, especially in the African-American aesthetic mode of religious apprehension, relativizes the role of nationalistic forms of Christianity or the overdependence on personal piety, religious leaders, and even religious institutions. We become more free to attune and attend to the insights of artists, poets, novelists, and other creatives like the ones who still come to the city of light to escape disillusionment. This preoccupation with Monk constantly begs the question of what would this mean for theology today? What does this mean for those of us hearing the light in the world around us that is becoming more one-dimensional, more polarized, and the freedoms we share becoming more diminished, darkened by the naturalization of war, the rise of fascism, and the impulses of aspiring dictators in the world? What does the dialogue between Monk's constructive compositional form and creative melodic centering say to our analogical imaginations in such troubling times? What is hearing the light in all of its angularities, its dissonances, its registers, its harmonic clusters, fragments, refracting rhythms, reharmonization, melodies, and counter-melodies? What does it say to the city of light? What does it say to this institute? What can they suggest to us as we collaborate together? Can these things represent more than just musical architecture? Can they represent the polyphony of voices within our world? My friend Willie Jennings asked a similar question in the foreword to my books. And I'm not just trying to get you to buy the books, all right? But Willie said this, quote, "What does it mean to live through a song or a drum beat or a bass guitar riff or a chord progression or lyrics that capture a stubborn dilemma? And who would find it necessary to do that? The answer," he said, "to both questions is black folks and black life. This, however," he says, "is not a racial exclusivity. This is the way of all flesh enfolded in a world of trouble," close quote. But I ask, can they represent even more? Can music represent even more? Can we hear the voice of traditions, institutions, social systems, curricular interests, and protocols that need to be established in a way that honors life? If we as theologians would honor the dialogical relationship between Bach's, Mozart, and Cohen's, the spirituals and the blues, between the dogmatic categories and concrete human experiences, and hear the light of the gospel according to Thelonious Monk, then the rhythms we share, even in the academic industrial complex, conceals the same paradoxical significance that many other institutions conceal in this age of uncertainty. Indeed, in this economy of redemption, I'm suggesting we not only hear the gospel in doctrinal statements or the reiteration of creeds, we will hear it in a renewed religious imagination. We will hear the gospel in the light, we will hear the light in the songs and testimonies and prayers of those who marched during the Black Freedom Movement. The Spirit's witness was sound in the Black Power movement, as James Cone noted, in the Black Lives Matter movement, in the Me Too movement, that's a women's movement. The symphonic witness will sound in the cries of the prisoners and the poor in Ferguson, Ukraine, Israel, and Gaza, and in the darkest corners of the City of Light. It will sound in the student encampments when they critique universities, and it will sound in the universities when universities resist unchecked state power. And in all these voices, if we hear the light, we will discern the voice of God that resounds in every moment and in every place where freedom for humanity and the world, a freedom for humankind and other kind, hear the light of the gospel according to Thelonious Monk. Thank you.
Well, Ray, your colleagues told me let Ray speak the last because he always liked the firework. I guess they were right. Let me paraphrase McKelway's comment on Barth, which you just quoted. I think your paper has spoken a meaningful word to the church, and I would add an inspiring and an inspiriting word, and not in spite of itself. Thank you so much for this powerful meditation on the meaning of Monk in our city of light and our age of uncertainty. Well, that sounds a bit like a conclusion, so we still have 10 minutes of discussion, and so I suggest we use this 10 minutes first for the questions for Raymond, and then if we still have a bit of time, we can have a general discussion with everyone. Yes, Chad.
Yes. Well, Ray, thank you.
Thank you.
First of all, I kept thinking that I was hearing Cornel West, who has very much the same style that you do. This talk that you gave couldn't have been given in another city with as much significance as it has today. You talk about bebop. Bebop was picked up by Saint-Germain-des-Prés in the 1940s. They were all dancing. This was the Saint-Germain-des-Prés wouldn't exist without bebop.
Wow.
And the other theme that comes through is the blacks who left the States and found something that they were looking for here in Paris. And again, we're going back to the area of Thelonious Monk. I think of Miles Davis, who would have married Julia Greco, except they didn't want to take her back to the States and have a white woman live with a black, with all of the
Racial
that
animus.
that would raise. This was a really marvelous talk, and it has so many different implications. We could talk about it for hours, but I'm struck by the fact that Thelonious Monk probably never expected that he would be the subject of a talk like your talk from theologians who really read into his music everything that you've read into it.
That's right.
Do you think that what do you think he would say about your text? And does it really matter?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, one of the points I make in my work is that Monk is playing jazz, he's not doing theology. And I go through this long excursus of why that's important. But that doesn't mean that Monk's jazz can't be read into theology or through an analogy. And the precise issue I'm trying to address is our failure to take into account extra church realities. You see? And I chose Monk because Monk wasn't religious. And so like this one statement where Monk is called an icon of the eschaton. I mean, Monk should be an icon of the Catholic Church. You know, I'm being facetious, but the point is that Monk, we should look, our lives, we should look at let me say it this way, we should look at the world in a much more animated way. We don't think of institutions as being living realities. Right? So what Monk would think about it is really secondary. You know, I think he would probably like, yeah, I don't know what he's talking about. You know, in his laconic style. But but I do talk about that, and I purposely avoid Monk's religion, any kind of emphasizing Monk's religious orientation, because I don't want to ascribe to Monk something that Monk wouldn't ascribe to himself. So that's how I approach it. Appreciate that question, and your comments, bro. Really do.
So I think if it's all right to just make two comments, because I think it connects a little bit to the last comment as well. I think what you did with Thelonious Monk really emphasizes what the task of theology is. And we tend, and this is maybe a bit specific to the French context as well, where theology is so marginalized, but we tend to think of us in such small ways. You know, this is, we work with the church, we work with the Bible, and you show that we can think theologically about something without appropriating it. I mean, I appreciated that you didn't make out a Christian Thelonious Monk, you know. So that I think is a very important point for the task of theology. And then I also actually had lots of resonance with reflection about hermeneutics in what you were saying about working with tradition or playing tradition and innovating. And I think that that's something that we also try to do in biblical studies, this tension between exploiting the historical material of the text and thinking with imagination, and that sort of connects with what you're saying as well, that we can't just, I think it's not enough if we just discuss the text historically, as much as I love this, but we need to engage it with critical imagination, and I really felt that from your reading. So this is not a question, but just resonance with my own.
Let me say this really quickly in response to that. One of my favorite writers is a man by the name of William Stringfellow, and he's always described as a Harvard-trained lawyer who left Harvard and moved into Harlem. And Stringfellow has this wonderful quote, and I just know the end of the quote. He's talking about biography as theology. He talks about, by way of the incarnation implicated in all of our lives, we, each one of us, are parables. The question is, what does your parable say? And Jesus is telling parables. You're a parable. I want to know your parable. And so in some sense, I'm using Monk in this parable as a form of parabolic suggestiveness to talk about theology. Open the door to realities outside the way we typically talk about it. And yet in the academy, again, which has both the potential to open the door to a world of possibility, but at the same time, for tradition to become this ideology that closes things down. And theology becomes just about studying these thinkers and getting the thinkers right, and you come out with all this technical information, but you ain't making no music, theologically, you see? And that's really what I'm after. And I think God has put me on that path. And so I have no shame about using the different thinkers that other people struggle with. And one of the questions I want to come back to is going back to this idea of, I wrote it down when you brought it up, Brother Mark, and that's this idea of applying blackness to God. I want to address that. In fact, one of the things I do when I look at Bart and Cohen is a line from Monk, improvise on the melody. And I argue that Bart improvises on the melody. He emphasizes Christological concentration. So he said, God is God. He said, and faith isn't in you, but faith isn't in the faithfulness of God. But Cohen does something different. He doesn't improvise on the melody. He improvises on the melody. Same line, different emphasis. And he'll say, God is black. Listen, Theology 101, Cone knows is not a strict identification between God and blackness. That's a blue note. That's dissonance. You got to hear it like a jazz person. So when he says God is black, you got to hear, man, I say, oh, man, that's cool. That's cool. But we hear it as a threat because we don't understand that because the Cantu firmness is clear and plain, the counterpoint can develop to his end. So Cone can say God is black, or then he can say that the Black Power movement is an alien to the gospel. It is the gospel. And we go, oh my God, how can he do this? No, he's not making an idol out of the Black Power movement. He's saying that the movement of God, you have to hear it within that like a blue note. And it can make your music sound good if you're open. See, so that's I wanted to come back and address that.
Thank you very much.
That was very good.
Friends, it's almost 4. What do we do? Do we take 10 more minutes? Or yes, perhaps. But I just want to make sure nobody has to, I don't want to make you uncomfortable, but if it's okay, we end it, instead of ending at 4, it will be 4:10, 10 past 4. Is that okay for everybody? Okay.
I mean, we did come here from the United States. So
yeah. So 10 minutes. What is 10 minutes?
I had to go home and eat croissants or something.
Right. Okay. So discussion. Question?
You say Monk, he was doing improvisation, I guess. I don't know much about Monk, but well, I understand he was doing improvisation.
Yes, in fact, one of the things that's said about Monk's improvisation, especially when we talk about harmony, some people say that he was even less concerned with harmony and more concerned with sound. Okay. And what made the most important thing to him, and this has a theological implication, is that he was concerned with getting a certain sound. And to do that, you have to break technique. Right? And what that suggests for us theologically is that there's a kind of musicality with God that's not reducible to our technique. We're good at doing theological technique. I think that's why colleges today are so concerned with religion rather than theology, because it's about the mastery of technique, which often excludes black voices. But if we can get into sound, and now you get the richness of the incarnation articulated from our various vantage points, that opens the door up in a way that I don't think we're always comfortable. And that's why I raised that question of whether this is really about control. See? Again, it's just because when you think of jazz, the world gets turned upside down. You go to Minton's Playhouse, the first will become last, and the last will become first. You got to sit at the black guy's feet. He's at the piano. Midnight has become noon. Right? Things have kind of turned around. And again, I don't mean this. I agree with Willie Jennings. This is not about racial exclusivity. It's about whose voices do we really hear? You see, so this is the issue for me tied to the idea of the Middle Passage and that Atlantic world. Charles Long talks about this notion of opugnancy. And this is like a language of like hitting a rock. But that rock, he said, it fires a new kind of beauty. So black people's beauty is fired in the crucible of oppression. And it gives rise to new meanings. And it's these new meanings that we should take seriously in terms of how they contribute to the larger meaning. That's what I like when, again, Monk says about a note. You got to mean a note. And he says a note to be as small as a pin or as large as the world. Right? The possibilities that happen when you and I can have a glass of wine and chop it up about our families and love on each other and be good friends. You see? This is all a part of the richness of the human experience. This is part of I see it in the city of light. Now again, I know you all got problems. All cities do. And, I can see that. But at the same time, I see something else beautiful if you all would open up to what you really are. We need different examples leading the world right now. You know, I'm not gonna say too much because, you know, I gotta go home. I gotta make sure I can get back into the country. So, but we need different models that model the beauty of difference and the affirmation of difference. And you see it in this room. When you see people from different countries and backgrounds, and they brought all their stylistics, you know, the different architecture. Anyway, I could wax on, but I just wanted to say that really quick. Yeah, got a gentleman back with his hand up.
Yeah, what was the impact of his music on the American society? Because I know that in Saint-Germain-des-Prés it was very cool to listen to him.
Yeah.
But in America, was it confined to a small elite? I know that, for example, Nina Simon was, when she performed in Carnegie Hall, was very conscious of performing in front of a wide audience.
Yeah.
Was it the same with him? Did he articulate?
For a long time, Monk was marginalized. In fact, there are people like Dizzy Gillespie and some of the other people who were much more affable than Monk was. And so their work took off, and a lot of them learned from him. So he had to deal with this idea of kind of being overlooked in some ways. But there's something else about Monk. He has this wonderful saying that I think answers your question quite well. He said, I say play your music your way. Don't play what the public want to play. You play what you want to play and let them pick up on what you're doing. Even if it takes you 15 to 20 years. And by the way, it took 15 to 20 years before Monk's music really took off. Right? So, in fact, in the book of Robin D.G. Kelly's book called Thelonious Monk, they call it the unyears. But notice on the tape, what did the gentleman say? He said, when Monk was making it, he was Monk. When Monk wasn't making it, he was still Monk. See? So his life wasn't determined. So what does that say to us? Sometimes we need a different definition of success. That's what it says to me. Right? Our success today is Elon Musk. That's success. You know, my grandpa had a second-grade education at a little store. Barely could take care of us. He was successful. Here I am sitting here in Paris. Right? I just taught at Harvard a year ago. You know, spent the whole year there. Right? And I'm a research associate there. My success is tied to his success. And my success is no greater than his success. Right? Unless you're looking at it monetarily. And that's to me not success. So that's one of the answers that I would give to that. In terms of the elite, I mean, it's kind of odd to critique Monk for being an elite, and at the same time when he's struggling because they got a piano that takes up most of their house. Yeah. Right? The apartment's so small, and the piano, you walk in, you bump into a piano. I mean, come on, what are we looking for? So just a thought.
So it means that it will be a gageure. I mean, if you want to play Monk, I guess there is no partition because it was.
Oh,
innovating horizon.
standard.
Yeah, oh yeah, here's a standard. Look, the most covered jazz song in history is Round Midnight. And that's Monk's song, right? But when you hear people play it, sometimes it can sound a little sentimental. When you hear Monk play it, and I think this is important, it has a ludic quality, kind of joyfulness, a happiness in it, right? And so I argue that really our move, and again, this is something we just talked about the other day, that we should think about life a little differently. There's in the black tradition something called capital P play, a ritual form of play that actually influences work. We tend to think I work hard so I can play hard. No. There's a redemptive form of play that now shapes all of the reality that I do in my work. You come home, you had a long day, man, you're tired, you just, and your child jumps on your lap with those big eyes. And now you're ready to work the next day because of play. You see? And I think we really have to kind of find the modalities within life. That's one of the things we can learn from black folk, right? Find those different modalities that really inform our life in this joyful way and live into those. Maybe it's just time for us to do a little bit more hand-holding and walking together and spending time together and things like that. That might influence the next day, right? And then again, I'm going to quote Carl Barth on this one. He said, again, we can always critique Barth. There's a lot to critique. But one of the points he said, he woke up every day and decided to become a Christian. Or decided to be a Christian. Right? Rather than assuming you're a Christian, you wake up every day and you decide what you're going to be. And you might decide you're not going to be one, but that's, we can talk about that another time. Anyway, I feel like I'm talking about too much.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you. Perhaps we can, if there's one or two questions,
general discussion to any of the four who have presented a paper today, perhaps questions that are more transversal. I don't know if there's any one of these.
On me fait remarquer peut-être qu'il peut nous dire un ou deux mots plus.
Non mais on aura un moment. Oui, c'est vrai que le temps passe vite. Peut-être qu'il faut passer tout de suite. Mais c'est pour ça que je disais une question, peut-être, je limite pas une ou deux. Si vous avez une question, et même il faudrait qu'elle soit assez brève, mais qui est plutôt un peu transversale sur l'ensemble de la journée, oui.
Mais moi, c'est pas une question, mais c'est une observation sur toutes les quatre présentations.
Oui.
Ça fait un peu mot de la fin.
Alors, vas-y, très bien, écoute, tu as le mot de la fin.
I was reflecting all of the contributions, and I've talked to some of you about this, but in all of the contribution that we heard today, and I think you sort of hinted to that question already, we heard the tension between what we can do as individuals, the call to, if I put it really in a very simplified way, the call to be a better person, basically, or a better human being. And I think possibly one dimension that was, I imagine, lurking in the background but was not as obvious is this work of the individual. How does it connect to our social fights? And how does it connect to things that have to change in society, where our being better human beings, I'm all for that, don't get me wrong, but might actually not be enough in some systemic organization that actually sort of, well, actively make it more difficult to be good people. And yeah, I think that's something I felt going on in all of the discussions. And I guess it is a question still, but maybe a bit of a too big one.
It sounded very much like a general conclusion, and I think it was very fitting. Thank you very much, Valérie. Before I thank everybody, a word of bibliography, because it has been promised since this morning. We didn't do it each presentation. So very quickly, because it will be on the website of the IPT, and perhaps also of I don't have time to say the whole name. NorcalMLK, so that you can see a more complete bibliography of our four speakers. But just quickly, for in the order of presentation, for Dr. Aaron Brizel, two forthcoming monographs: The History of Religion and Reflections on a New Cognitive Humanism, Mythic Fissure and the Cognitive Imagination of Matter, and the second, The Rhythm of Nature, Howard Thurman and the Philosophical Locus. Dr. Dwight Hopkins, we're getting formal again. Here, we got it here at the library. Being Human, Race, Culture and Religion is one I can mention, especially for our students. You can, it's available at the library. And I mentioned just one other one, perhaps, a Black Theology of Liberation, because it was part of the topic this morning in your paper, Dwight. And now for Dr. Andrea White, also two forthcoming books, Scandal of Flesh, Black Women's Bodies, God and Politics. I love that title. And the second one, also forthcoming, Fissures of Hope. No subtitle, huh? I like that too. And there's something about fissures, because you too have the term in your title. And finally, but you can see them here, and they are at the library too. I say that for our students. Dr. Raymond Carr, Trilogy, Theology in the Mode of Monk, and Aesthetics of Barth and Cohn, on revelation and freedom. There's another book by Raymond, which is available free online, The Dancing Monk and the Rhythm of Divine Life. So, thank you so much to the four of you for everything you have brought to us today. We heard marvelous talks and we had marvelous discussions together, and we can't wait to do another one of these.
The International Colloquium Series, confronting global issues with moral clarity and intellectual depth.